Okay, good afternoon. Today is a very special day. Some of you might remember 453 years ago, the Arizal passed away, the greatest Kabbalist, and exactly 453 years. And 53 years ago, another great luminary entered this world, my son Yeshua, Rabbi Yeshua. So I know he was born on the 400th yahrzeit, so that's why I could remember how old he is.
Our son too, born today.
Happy birthday. Okay, we're still in the middle of Ethics of the Fathers, Chapter 2, Mishnah 7. We spent some time talking about the negatives, the more flesh, the more worms, and so on. Now we're going to do the positives. And that's in the middle of the paragraph. But the Hebrew doesn't have the word but it's self-understood that we're drawing a comparison or a contrast between the negatives. The more of the negatives, the more negativity it breeds. And the more of the positives, the more positivity it breeds. So, but the more Torah, the more life. So we'll stop there for a moment and discuss what that means. The simple meaning is that most things in life, in excess, are negatives. Too much of anything in the mundane world can be unhealthy. Everything you want to have in moderation. That's a general rule, good advice. But when it comes to Torah, it works the other way around. The more Torah, the more life. And the meaning of life here is literal, that Torah actually increases your life. In our prayers we say, Ki heim chayenu, for they are the life. They are our lives. The Torah gives us life, and there are many other verses, biblical verses and in prayers where we talk about Torah, how it gives us life. And we can't live without Torah. And it means literally that we can't survive without it. If God forbid the Jewish people would cease studying Torah, the world would revert to nothingness. There would be no world, literally speaking, not just figuratively. But of course, it means much more than just it gives us physical life. It makes life worthy of its name. A person who is devoid of Torah has a very empty life, a very meaningless life. Torah is what gives the life meaning and purpose. King David would say, if not for your Torah, that is my delight, I would have been lost in my suffering. King David went through a lot of suffering in his life. He was hated by his own family members. His father-in-law, King Saul, wanted to kill him. His own son, Shalom, started a rebellion against him and wanted to kill him. And he had so many enemies that would taunt him. His whole life was riddled with difficulty and with pain. And what kept him alive, King David says, it's your Torah. You know, everyone knows of King David. Oh, he was a warrior. He took this woman against. It was a form of adultery. It looked like adultery. That's why everyone knows King David. Though he was also a singer. He played a harp. King David's greatest achievement was his knowledge and study of Torah. The book of Psalms, authored by King David, has 150 Psalms. Most Psalms range anywhere from 2 verses. Even the second largest Psalm has about 70 verses. But there's one Psalm, Psalm 119, that has 176 verses. And every single one of those verses, King David is singing the praise of Torah. 176 verses. There's no comparison to anything else. That was his life. His life revolved around the study of Torah. And he says clearly that if not for your Torah, that is my delight, I could not have survived. In more contemporary times, there was a great 20th century rabbi, Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, who tragically, in 1 year, lost his wife, his mother, and his brother, all within 1 year. And he said that if he would not have been able to survive if not for the study of Torah. Now, he was also a great secular philosopher. He didn't say it was his philosophy that kept him going. He didn't say it was his brilliant knowledge of so many other disciplines. But it was his knowledge and the study of Torah. That's what kept him alive, literally kept him alive. Rabbi Akiva famously told a critic of his, Rabbi Akiva lived at the time when the Romans issued an edict, a decree, that anyone who was caught teaching Torah publicly would be put to death. And Rabbi Akiva defied the order of the Roman government, and he kept on teaching Torah publicly. And one of the people who saw him do what he was doing said to him, Rabbi Akiva, you're putting your life in danger. So he answered with a parable. The fox was hungry and was coming close to the edge of the water, and he says to the fish were running back and forth. He says to the fish, what are you running from? Who are you running from? So we're running from the nets that the fishermen have placed in the water, so we're trying to avoid getting caught. So the sly fox says, well, why don't you just come on dry land and be with me? I'll take good care of you. And the fish say, you foolish fox, you think you're so smart. If in the water, which is a very source of life, our lives are in danger, how much more so if we leave our source of life, if we leave the water. Torah is compared to water, and we are like fish in the water. If we abandon the water, if we abandon the Torah, we have no basis to exist. And he meant that not just in a spiritual sense, he meant that literally. But of course, in a spiritual sense, we also know that Torah gives us a higher dimension of life. The Hebrew word for life is chayim. And I discussed this many times, why it's a plural word. And there are many, many ways of explaining it. One way of explaining it is, there are two worlds. There's a physical world and there's a spiritual world. Some things are alive in the physical world, and some things are alive in the spiritual world. You get the best of both worlds when you study Torah while you're alive. Because when you leave this world, your soul goes into paradise, and there they study Torah as well. But the Torah that you study there is nothing compared to the Torah that we study when we're down here, because we have both lives. We live on two dimensions, on the physical and on the spiritual dimension. Also, the word chayim, life, is interpreted by the Talmud to mean something that endures. The Talmud gives an example of the term mayim chayim, living waters. For certain kinds of purification, you need living waters. What is the definition of a living water? So the Mishnah says that if there's a river that dries up within every 7 years, some rivers dry and then they become active again, that's not kosher for the use for the purification process, because it's not called chayim, it's not alive. Why isn't it alive? When the water is there, the water is there. Because if it doesn't last, it's not alive even when it's there. Something that is terminal, even when it's there, is not fully there. So the Torah is what gives us true life, because the Torah never changes. It's always there. It's the ultimate source of truth, of consistency. And when we study Torah, when we increase in the study of Torah, it gives us greater, more life, quantitatively and qualitatively. Then there's another deeper meaning given by the Ben Ish Chai. Ben Ish Chai was a Iraqi rabbi about 120 years ago. He was the leading rabbi in Iraq, known for his work, the Ben Ish Chai. So one of his commentaries on Ethics of the Fathers, he says, what do you mean by increase Torah, the more life? What does he mean by the more Torah? Should have just said, Torah gives you life. And what does it mean it gives you more life? So he says that Torah exists on 4 levels. There are 4 levels of interpretation of the Torah. And these 4 levels, if you just stick to one level, that's Torah. But if you want to get more life, you need to have all 4 levels. One of the 4 levels, the 4 levels are known by an acronym, by the word PaRDeS. PaRDeS literally means orchard. And the Talmud uses that as a metaphor for people who go into the deepest levels of Torah knowledge. But it stands for, yes?
PaRDeS, paradise, yes? Is there a correlation?
Does the word paradise come from the word PaRDeS? It could be. That could be.
There's at least a vibrational association.
It could be. So what does the word PaRDeS stand for? So it stands for, the P stands for pshat. Pshat means the simple meaning, the simple, straightforward meaning of the text. So when you study Torah, you read the Torah the way it's translated literally, and sometimes not literally. Simple meaning doesn't always mean literal. Simple meaning means the meaning closest to what the author has in mind. So that's one level. Then you have the R of PaRDeS. The R stands for remez, hints. Sometimes the Torah will say one thing, but it alludes, it hints to a totally different thing. Sometimes it's through the gematria, through the numerical value. Sometimes a word could be used in the Torah, and it has a numerical value that alludes to another word. Then there's drash. Drash is the homiletical, that's the fancy word they use for it, but most people don't know what the word homiletical means any more than the word drash. Drash means probing, when you probe beneath the surface to get a deeper message. Sometimes the Torah will just tell you a story, but the story has a message. That's the method of drash, where you seek a deeper meaning. And the S of PaRDeS stands for sod, the secrets. The Torah has embedded in it secrets, mystical meanings that deal with God, His attributes, the soul, and the spiritual matters that are hinted, are buried and embedded in the text. To give you a little bit of a way of understanding that, I'll give you an example. 4 different people will be asked about, what does the earth mean to you? So a farmer would say, potatoes, carrots, vegetables, things that grow from the earth. That's what the earth means. That's a very simple understanding of the earth. It's a place that produces vegetation. You ask an archaeologist, what does the earth? He'll say, well, there's some relics in the ground that tell you about an ancient civilization and how they lived their lives by looking at their pottery, about their weapons, and so on and so forth. Those are hints. Those are hints that are embedded in the earth that allude to other events and other aspects of history. Then you have the geologist. The geologist, when he talks about the earth, he talks about the composition of the earth. He's talking about the oil. He's talking about the different things that are the earth contains within it.
Anybody else have their phone on?
I turned it off.
We should all coordinate. But then, for someone else, a treasure hunter could be looking for treasures. The treasures are not part of the earth. Someone had to have planted them there, but they're there. And if you look long enough, you'll find those treasures. The same thing in the Torah. There's a simple level, the vegetation, you could say. Then there's the allusion, the hints. That's like the archaeologist. Then there's the drash, the deeper, the underlying message. That's the geologist. And then there's the treasure hunter, the secrets of the Torah. What happens if you take off any one of those 4 levels? Let's say the P stands for pshat, the simple meaning, the literal meaning, and say, I don't believe in the literal meaning of the text. What does the word then spell? It spells, the letters daras. If you take the P off of it and you rearrange the letters, it spells daras. Daras means to trample. Then you're trampling the Torah. If you believe the Torah is not to be taken seriously, literally, you're trampling the very essence of Torah, that it's God's wisdom. What happens if you get rid of the R? The R remez, the hints. The hints are the part of Torah that bring you a lot of, they're very exciting. People get very excited about numerology when you find one word and it has the same value as another word. So what happens if you get rid of the R? It has the letters of diffus. Diffus means something that's printed, something that's in a mold. It's very dry. It has no life to it. It's a mold. When you put something in a mold, you're limiting it. What happens if you get rid of the drash, the deeper meaning, the messages in the Torah? So you have, what are the letters then? PaRDeS, pras. Pras means a part of something, a half of something. In Talmudic jargon, pras means a half. If you don't get the message, you're only getting half of what the Torah is trying to tell you. The Torah is telling you that Abraham traveled. That's one half of it. There's some deeper meaning, that his traveling was a spiritual growth. That's the pshat, that's the drash, that's the deeper meaning. If you take out the deeper meaning, you only have half. You don't have the whole thing, the whole message. But if you take out the sod, the secrets, what do you have? You have pered. Those who know Hebrew, what is a pered? No, close, pretty close. What's the product of a donkey and a horse?
A mule.
A mule. What is it about a mule?
Stubborn.
It's stubborn, but what else about a mule? It cannot reproduce. It cannot reproduce. If you take out the secrets of the Torah, the mystical meanings of the Torah becomes sterile. It cannot reproduce. That's why today is such an important day, because today is the yahrzeit of the Arizal, who's the greatest teacher of Kabbalah, who lived in the city of Tzfat. For 2.5 years, he taught Kabbalah, and he became the most famous Kabbalist. At the age of 38.5, he passed away. And he produced more knowledge of Kabbalah than anyone in all of human history, and he had the greatest impact on Jewish life, considering the fact that he was only active publicly 2.5 years. At any rate, that's what it means when you increase, when you add to Torah, mean not just adding, learning more Torah. Obviously, the more you learn of something positive, the more educated you'll be, the better you'll be, the more refined you will be, the more spiritual you'll be. But it means you have to have all parts of Torah. Not everyone is good at every level of Torah. So the more you get into each of the levels, the more life you have. Then it says, the more sitting, the more yeshiva is the Hebrew word, the more wisdom. What does that mean, the more sitting? So the commentaries explain, as in the brackets here, the more that you sit in the company of scholars, or the more you spend time with colleagues, with teachers, with students, with others, the more wisdom you will acquire. People could learn on their own. And there are people who are called autodidacts, people who taught themselves. And they're brilliant people who can learn a lot on your own. And you can probably now get a lot of knowledge from the internet. But if you don't sit together with others, in other words, you don't have interaction with others, although you can have interaction on the internet as well. So that would be better than not having interaction. But the idea of sitting and having interaction, that contributes to your wisdom, because there's so much that you can get from hearing other people's ideas, throwing your ideas at them, and they throw them back at you, and you argue and you discuss. And we discussed this many times. The famous statement in the Talmud, I learned much from my teachers, I learned more from my colleagues, and the most I learned from my students. So when you sit in a yeshiva, meaning in an environment where there's a lot of other people there, and people could argue and people could ask questions, that is the way that you increase your wisdom. Then he goes on, if you increase the more counsel, the more understanding. What does he mean by counsel? So the simple meaning is that whenever you have a question about matters that are important, and you're smart, you're brilliant, you can figure it out yourself, the understanding that you will reach will not be as deep and as effective and as accurate as that which you will get from others with whom you consult. Because when you consult with others, number one, someone might have a better understanding of the subject than you do. Even though if you're smart and you're brilliant, people think a certain way, they have a certain thought pattern, but other people have a different thought pattern, and you can only be enriched by consulting with others. But it goes deeper than that, because we have built in... Who's next? We have built-in biases. And that's the way we were created. God knew that we're going to be biased. And He expects us to have biases, and sometimes our biases are good, but not always. So we look at things very subjectively. We don't see things objectively. But when we consult with someone else, they will see things objectively, even though they're also biased, but they're not biased the way we are biased. In other words, their bias is in a different direction. So you're exposing yourself to another way of looking at things, and maybe your way is better. But on the other hand, maybe the other person's way is better. But especially if it's about spiritual matters, if you're consulting with someone about a spiritual matter, there's a famous saying of a Hasidic Rebbe that when two people get together to discuss matters of life, things that are relevant to their lives, things that deal with morality and purpose in life, it's two godly souls against one animal soul. And what does that mean? Every one of us has a godly soul and an animal soul. The godly soul is totally selfless. It has no ego. The animal soul is totally selfish, full of ego. And that's where we go wrong, when we allow our animal soul to guide our lives and dictate to us what we should do and how we should live our lives. So we have to always be open to hear our godly soul. But sometimes our godly soul doesn't get through because our animal soul is too strong and is overwhelming the influence of the godly soul. So what do? We go to a good friend and we consult with a friend. Now the friend's godly soul is selfless, so it's only interested in the other person, in helping. My godly soul is interested in helping myself as well. My godly soul wants me to become a better person. So how many godly souls are there too? Because they team up. Both godly souls are interested in my personal development and growth. Now my animal soul is interested in what? In me only. That's it. The other person's animal soul is also interested in him, but he's not interested in messing me up. The animal soul cares about himself, but he doesn't care about me. So my animal soul and his animal soul are not on the same page. So how many godly souls are on the same page? 2. How many animal souls are on the same page? 1. Only 1. So it's 2 against 1. So you always benefit when you consult with someone else because you have that person's godly soul supporting your godly soul and maybe schlepping you out of the clutches of your own animal soul. If a person, God forbid, drowns, you would want someone to come along who knows how to swim to pull you out. You can't pull yourself out if there's a current that you can't navigate or you don't know how to swim. So you always want someone to pull you out. Reminds me of the story. It has nothing to do with the subject, but once a Jew in Russia was drowning, and a Tsarist soldier comes along and he's laughing at the Jew who's drowning, and the Jew says, "Please save me, save me," and he's just laughing at him, hoping for him to drown. So the Jew says, "Down with the Tsar." "Oh, you criticize the Tsar?" He jumped in and pulls him out. So sometimes we need the godly soul to pull us out, not the Russian Tsarist soldier. So it's very important to get counsel from others. And what does counsel do to you? It brings you understanding. What does that mean? It brings you understanding. The English word understanding is not as clear as the Hebrew word tevuna. Tevuna is related to the word bina. What's the difference between chachma and bina? Chachma is wisdom and bina is understanding. What's the difference? So whatever the English words mean is irrelevant. It's the Hebrew that counts. Chachma is having knowledge of information. You have an idea in your head. You know something. Bina is where you have the ability to build on it, to draw an inference. If premise A is correct, I could derive and infer that there's another thing that's true and correct. Most people, when they learn and they have knowledge, don't have the ability to draw inferences. And sometimes that's crucial for really understanding the subject, that you're able to draw an inference and see what is implied, not just what is being stated explicitly, but what's stated implicitly. When you learn on your own, you usually get a very one-dimensional, surface level awareness of the subject. You learn facts. There are students who study day and night for their tests. They cram for their tests and they get a good grade, but they have no understanding of the subject. They just have basic knowledge of the subject, but there's no understanding of it because they really didn't learn. They just memorized facts. And even if they have good memories and they really reproduced everything on the test, that is not really understanding. Understanding is where you understand the principles and you're able to draw inferences. And where do you get that ability? You get that ability by consulting with others, getting other people to give you some more insight.
What's the dot compared to the Chokhmah and the Bina?
Okay, dot, it's a separate subject, but I'll mention it very briefly. Dot is where you attach yourself to the knowledge, where the knowledge is no longer just academic, just knowledge. You attach yourself to it, so the knowledge translates into feelings. So that's the bridge between intellect and feelings. That's briefly the meaning of dot. We find in the Torah, God appears to Abraham in the plains of Mamre. Why does the Torah tell you that God appears to him in the plains of Mamre? Mamre was a guy who lived then. What's so special about him that the Torah should give him a certain type of credit for Abraham's circumcision? Because God appears to Abraham after he circumcised himself. So Rashi quotes the Talmud that Mamre gave Abraham advice. Abraham consulted with Mamre about circumcision. So the question is asked, God commands Abraham to circumcise himself. Why did he have to consult? So the Tosfos commentary says he didn't consult whether he should circumcise himself, but he consulted with him whether he should do it publicly or do it privately. Why was it a question? Because Abraham's mission was to change the world, to bring the world around the belief in one God, and he was very successful. Now that Abraham is going to circumcise himself, he's making a statement, I am different. And people would say, well, then we don't have to learn from you. And Abraham was concerned that maybe if he does it publicly, it will take away from his ability to influence the world. So he consulted. Why did he have to consult with Mamre? Because Abraham was not a man of the world. He was a man of the spirit. He was a spiritual person. He was not connected to the world. He didn't know his audience. Mamre was a regular guy. He knew what was going on. So when you have to question your approach, whether it's relevant, whether it's an approach that people will appreciate, you want to consult with people who are in the field. It's like in business. If you have a product, you want to know if it's a good product, you're not going to ask professors in university. You're going to ask regular people who are interested in buying the product, or someone who deals with regular people on a regular basis. So looking for counsel means whether you have the ability to take an idea and apply it. And that's why it says in the Talmud, women were endowed with greater bina than men. Men might have more chachma, but women have more bina. Women have the ability to apply things much more easily than the men are capable of doing. Now, in order to give counsel, you have to have experience. Someone who's an advisor, if he doesn't have experience, I always find it funny that some people who give marriage advice have never been married. You often wonder, how are they qualified to do it? Maybe they are, but it's a little bit of a question. How could you give advice if you didn't have the experience? You need experience. Experience is the most important thing in giving advice. That's why later on in Ethics of the Fathers it says when you're 40 years old, that's the age of Bina. That's when you get a little bit a deeper understanding. When you reach the age of 50, that's the age of counsel, of Eitzah. In other words, you need more of life's experiences. You have to know you have to have applied your knowledge. This theoretical knowledge is not enough to give you the power of counsel. And that's why the Talmud says that you have to give respect to a senior citizen. Even if the senior citizen is not Jewish, is not learned, is not well versed in Torah or in anything else, just the fact that they're old. Why? Because they're educated by the experiences of life. And I told this many times. There was a famous Rebbitzin Youngreis, who was a Holocaust survivor. And she spoke publicly all the time, and she was a brilliant. What? She spoke here.
I saw her here.
She was a brilliant speaker. She had a command of the language, and she was very, very, very eloquent. So someone once asked her, "Which university did you attend?" And she said, "I attended the University of Bergen-Belsen." She was educated by the Holocaust, by her experiences in the Holocaust. You can't get a better education than that. A horrible education in one sense, but the most powerful education on the other side of it. There's a story told, I think I told the story once before, of the great Heschel Landau. He was the rabbi of the city of Prague about 250 years ago. He's known by his work called Noda B'Yehuda, but he was probably one of the 5 greatest Talmudic scholars of the generation. And he became rabbi of Prague when he was very young. He might have been in his early 20s or around that age. And before he was accepted as rabbi, they tested him, because Prague was a city full of scholars, full of rabbis. There were 100 people who could have become the rabbi of Prague who lived there, and he was chosen because he was known for his brilliance. But they wanted to test him to see if he was able to answer the questions. So they gave him a list of, I think, 10 questions. And the questions were practical questions that needed someone to apply Jewish law to it. And he got 9 out of 10 right. He got 1 wrong. So they looked at him and they said, "What's this? You got 1 wrong?" He says, "The one I got wrong, was that a real question or was that a made-up question? Was it a real question that someone had an issue that required adjudication, or you just made up a question academically?" So they said, "No, it was a made-up question." "What about the other 9? Those were real questions." He said, "The fact that it was not practical, and this is something spiritual in a way, means that I couldn't really give you the right, I wasn't guaranteed to give you the right answer." He says, no rabbi, no scholar could always be right about things. So how could you trust a rabbi? How can you trust anyone in any field? So you assume that they're well versed in the knowledge of the subject, so they'll probably know the answer. No, it's not enough that they're well versed. Because they're rabbis and the lives of people depend on them, they have special divine support. God supports the rabbi because he is going to give rulings that will determine one's course of life. He says, if it's not practical, you don't have the support. If it's not relevant to anyone's life, then the rabbi doesn't need that support, so he's able to make mistakes. He's not infallible. He'll make a mistake. Says the 9 that you asked me that were practical, I had support, divine support, because I had to give answers that really affect people's lives. What that means is when something is down to earth and practical, you have special power that God gives you. And that's why if someone comes to you and says, "I have a problem," I have a problem, a relationship problem, whatever the problem may be, and I want your advice, I want your counsel. And you could say, and as many people, including myself, will say, I don't. Who am I to give you advice? I'm not God. I don't have all the knowledge. That's not a good response, because if you really care for that person and you serve as that person's advisor, God gives you special power to be right. As long as your attitude is, I'm going to give the advice that I think is best for that person, not best for myself, but best for that person. And even though you might feel, why get involved? Why when you're not really the greatest expert in the world? You don't have a PhD in psychology. No, you should get involved, because God will give you the support that you need, that your advice will be good advice. The next thing is increasing. The more charity, I have another version that says increasing. The more charity, the more peace. Now that's very simple. Why does charity give you peace? Because the more charity you give, the more love you will generate between you and the recipient of your charity. The more love, there'll be more peace. You don't fight with people you hate. You have more. The more you love one another, the more that people are charitable, the more unity there is, and the more peace.
You're supposed to give charity in settle. So.
Okay, the question is, you're supposed to give charity anonymously, secretly. That's the highest form of charity, when no one knows that you gave. That's true, but the person himself doesn't even know who gave. That's true, but that's not absolute, because at the same time, one of the medieval rabbis, known as the Rashba, writes that it's a mitzvah to publicize people who give charity. Why? Because that will generate more people giving charity. So someone once asked the Rebbe, how do I reconcile the two? On one hand, I have to give secretly. I just don't sign the check. No, that's a joke. The more you give secretly, the better it is, and yet it says you should publicize. So the Rebbe says, give a lot publicly and give a lot more secretly. That way you can do both. And the more...
It's actually a great blessing to be able to give anonymously. Sometimes we have to give publicly, but God blesses us by being...
Right, because sometimes giving anonymously means that you're not doing it for the fame, you're not doing it for the recognition, and you're not embarrassing the person who's the recipient because he doesn't know who gave it. And so there are of course many virtues in giving anonymously, but there are also virtues in giving publicly, because it creates harmony and peace. But also it has another meaning. Some commentators say another thing. They point to a story in the Talmud. One great rabbi, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, had a dream that his nephew would lose 700, I think it was 700, let's say dollars, whatever, 7,000. And he didn't tell his nephew that he had the dream, but instead encouraged the nephew to give that money for charity. And he was able to convince them to give that money to charity minus, I think it was $13. And then the government came, the tax collector, and collected $13. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai told them that he had a dream, and that's why he encouraged them to give the charity, because he knew they were going to lose the money. So the best way to lose the money is to give it to charity. But he never told them that he had the dream, so they didn't give the total amount. So he said, why didn't you tell us the total amount? Because they thought once the government is coming back to more taxes, they'll never end. So he said, no, don't worry, this is the last they're going to come to you, because I had the dream that you were only going to give 700 plus whatever, 13. So they said, why didn't you tell us that you had the dream? If you told us, we would have given it right away. He said, I didn't want you to give it because of the dream. I wanted you to give it because you wanted to give it. So what does that have to do with giving more charity, it creates more peace. It creates peace with the government. The government is not at your throat. The more tzedakah you give, the less taxes you will have to pay. Because if it's destined, it says in Rosh Hashanah, God determines how much money we're going to make and how much we're going to lose. And you could lose, how could you lose money? You could lose money literally by losing it. Or you could spend it on medical bills. That's called losing the money, because if you were healthy, you wouldn't have to spend it. Or legal bills, you're being sued and you have to hire lawyers. So the money that you give to tzedakah takes away from those losses. So the more money you give to tzedakah, the less taxes you will have to give. And the less taxes you have to give, the more peace you'll have with the government. That's how one of the commentaries explain it. But then there's the ultimate explanation that when you give tzedakah, you create peace not only between you and the rest of the world, the government, your fellow, but you're creating peace between you and God. There's no greater way of creating peace and harmony and unity between us and God than by giving tzedakah. Because when we give, when we reach out to others, God reaches out to us. So it affects our relationship with God as well. Now, how do you give more? What does it mean to give more? Jewish law requires that we give 10%, we tithe. Some people think it's a Christian thing. No, it's a Jewish thing. We're supposed to give 10% of our net income to tzedakah. So if we make $100,000 a year after taxes, we're supposed to give at least $10,000. That's a minimum. Then the Talmud says maximum 20%. Don't give more than 20%.
I did not know that. I never heard that.
Well, that's what it says in the Talmud.
That's why I come to these lunches.
So you maximum 20%. Why not more than 20%? Because if you give more, you could impoverish yourself, and then you'll have to depend on charity. So it's going to be like a vicious circle. So you give maximum 20%. However, it says, the Tanya says that if you give tzedakah selfishly, in other words, if you're giving it because you want to help others, then there's a limit of 20%. And many authorities say that if you're a billionaire or close to that, you're allowed to give more than 20%. It's for the average person who doesn't make infinite amount of money. But if you give tzedakah, let's say I give tzedakah because I have transgressed. And when you transgress, you have to repent for it. And part of repentance is to fast. And it's hard to fast as much as we have to for all our sins. You can redeem the fast with charity. So let's say you have to fast 10 days to get rid of 10 sins. Instead of the 10 fast days, you give whatever amount of money. And the more you give, the more it atones for your sins. And if you're not a big sinner, and you give more because you want to refine yourself, you're not doing it for the other. So here it's interesting. When you're selfless, there's a limit. When you're selfish, there's no limit. Because what happens if you need money to pay for your doctor? Are you going to say, I gave 20% for my medical costs, I'm not giving another penny, so I won't go to my doctor when I need to go? No, of course, you'll give his many amount. Person will give whatever it is. He'll give everything away to keep himself healthy. Well, why is spiritual health any different? So you can give more than 20% when it comes to spiritual health. So giving more means giving even beyond the 20%, or at least beyond the 10%. Another explanation is, someone comes to you and say, I need some help. How much do you need? $100. Here's $100. That's fine. But then, to give more means, you think about, one second, what does the person says he needs? That's how much he wants, he's asking for. But if I really look into his situation, I'll discover that he needs much more. There's a famous story told with Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, or I heard it about his father, but it's no different. He was sitting with his students before Passover, and a Jew comes to him and he says, Passover is coming. Can I make, on Passover at the Seder, you're supposed to drink 4 cups of wine. I don't have any wine. Can I make the Seder on 4 cups of milk? And the rabbi gave him the answer, whatever it was. And then after the man left, the rabbi calls his wife and says, fill up a package of meat and vegetables and fruits and everything else and deliver it to this man. So the students asked the Rabbi, he only said he needed wine. Why are you sending him everything? I know you're a charitable person, but you can't just give everyone all their needs or everything for the holiday. He says, didn't you understand what he was saying? He was saying he's going to drink milk. If he was going to drink milk, it means he wasn't going to eat meat. Because if he had meat, he'd know that he can't have milk afterwards. So if he doesn't have meat, he probably doesn't have other stuff as well. So I sent him everything so that's called giving more. The guy only asked for wine. He only needed wine, it seemed. But he realized that sometimes you look into the situation of a person, you know they need more. And it doesn't necessarily have to be more material things. It can be more warmth, more spiritual. A person comes with a question about certain things, they're usually hiding a lot more about themselves. And they're embarrassed to tell the whole story. So if you find you can go deeper into their situation, you'll give them more of what they need. Another example, King David was a judge besides everything else. And a poor man and a rich man came to him. The rich man claimed that the poor man owed him money, and there were witnesses and whatever, and King David ruled the poor man has to pay. And then after he ordered him to pay, he took money out of his own pocket and gave it to the poor man. He wasn't going to pervert justice. If he would have said, you know what, the guy's a poor man, why should I make him pay? That would be a crime. The Torah says you're not allowed to show favoritism to a poor person in a court case. If the poor man is a thief, he has to be convicted as a thief. You can't say, well, he's poor. You know, sometimes in society you hear people saying the people who do the shoplifting, they're poor, they're stealing money, milk for their children. Yes, I understand. It's a big pity on them, so give them the milk. You can give it out of the generosity of your own heart, but don't condone theft just because they're poor. That's the breakdown of society. When you start condoning theft because they're poor, and someone will say poor, it's relative poor. You know, a multimillionaire compared to Bill Gates is poor. So the multimillionaire could say, I'm poor, so I could steal. Everyone is going to use it for their own benefit.